Welcome back, everyone. We're taking a look at some of the biggest stories from 2016 and really trying to look ahead as well to the coming year. Still with me, Simon Marks, President and Chief Correspondent of Feature Story News, Wang Guan, Political Correspondent with CGTN, and Afshin Molavi is the editor of the New Silk Road Monitor. Gentlemen, I want to talk a little bit more about China's continued global rise, from climate change to hosting the G20 summit in Hangzhou, state visits to Latin America. How is China growing its influence globally? And Afshin, let me begin with you.
Sure. I think one of the things that has been very interesting is over the past few months in particular, as we've seen this rising tide of anti-globalization sentiment grow, particularly in the Western world, we've seen the Chinese leadership step forward and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, we can't get into a round of protectionism. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, this system of globalization has worked well, certainly for China, but it has worked well for the global economy as well. So for the first time, we're seeing China really forced into a position of intellectual leadership on promoting and supporting globalization. And I think that's very important going forward.
Wang Guan?
I want to talk about one thing in particular, that is climate change. Donald Trump has been saying that he's willing to deny the existence of global change and to undo the Paris Agreement that over 200 countries have come together to sign. So I think this offers a unique opportunity for China really to take the lead in terms of climate change.
And China really did take the lead, especially when it came to the Paris Climate Agreement, China and the United States.
Yes, especially given the domestic concerns. We had last year over 180 smoggy days in Beijing, the Chinese capital, 45 days of severely smoggy days. I'm sure our friend Nathan King will tell us a thing or two about that at the end of this month when he comes back. But it's pretty bad. And but according to a global climate change tracker, China has been decreasing its use of coal 3 years in a row. The piled up steel, the unused steel is so big that is the equivalent to the entire output of Western Europe combined. So I think China is going on the path of renewable energy and clean energy, and it hopes to make countries commit to the same goal.
Simon, what role does China want to play on world stage?
Well, I mean, I think that you can't separate that conversation out from the conversation we were having before the break about Donald Trump. I mean, the reality here is that there are shifting tectonic plates globally. Donald Trump may not trash the one China policy, but it's far from clear that he will continue Barack Obama's pivot to the Asia-Pacific region, in which the United States was engaged in an attempt to counterbalance Chinese influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Vladimir Putin, as we said earlier, has created difficulties for the United States in Syria. So this notion that the United States is able to project itself as the sole superpower, the indispensable nation, as president after president has said here in America, becomes increasingly difficult, and China has the opportunity, as it's already shown, to generate policies very international in scope with regard to the environment. Look at the deal that was announced late last year, at the beginning of this year, about banning the ivory trade within China, which was widely praised by environmentalists around the world. So those tectonic plates are shifting, and if Donald Trump, as US president, scales everything back and leads an America that becomes increasingly inward-looking, the opportunity for China becomes enormous.
Let's quickly talk about Cuba. Fidel Castro died last year. What will be his remaining legacy? And will we see a dramatic transformation in Cuba, considering Fidel Castro had not really been leading the country because of health reasons and he had retired? Will there be a big shift? And what about its relationship with the rest of the world, Afshin?
Yeah, I think there will be a dramatic shift in Cuba when the Cuban political leadership once and for all puts aside its antagonism to the United States and welcomes a relationship with the United States. Frankly, and China is actually a good example here. China would not be the global economic powerhouse it is today if it had an antagonistic relationship with the United States. China's rise coincided with a global integration with the United States. Iran is another example here. Iran cannot be a regional economic power or even the global power that it could be with an antagonistic relationship to the United States. So that's when Cuba will transform itself.
Wang Guan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to Donald Trump and this policy, what kind of person he puts in charge in dealing with Cuba. we know that I think he faces two different factions of pressure. One comes from, the business lobby. I think the airline businesses, the credit card businesses, they all want to tap into the Cuban market. But on the other hand, don't forget about the Cuban Americans who voted 52% for Donald Trump in Florida. He wants to keep those votes, and he wants to take into the considerations of the grievances of the Cuban Americans have down in Florida and across this country. After all, he's having a re-election in 4 years.
It all boils down to the E word. If there was a Cuban on this panel, they would say, for as long as the embargo is in place by the United States against Cuba, there can be only limited progress in terms of the relationship. And what happens to the embargo? You've got the pressure of American business now to get in there and to invest, but you've also got the pressure from Republicans up on Capitol Hill who say we can't be rewarding this communist neighbor which continues to ill-treat its own people. That's a very, very delicate balance to strike. Is Donald Trump the balance-striking kind of person? We'll have to wait and see.
Cuba played a tremendous role in the peace agreement between Colombia and FARC. Really offered a glimmer of hope, and President Manuel Santos. Let's listen to what he had to say about this peace agreement.
El acuerdo de paz en Colombia.
The Colombian peace agreement is a glimmer of hope in a world touched by numerous conflicts and too much intolerance. It's a demonstration that what in principle seems impossible, with perseverance, can become possible, including in Syria or in Yemen.
Posible.
This agreement essentially ends 50 years of armed conflict between FARC and the government. It was a little touch and go at first, but it seems to have been passed by Congress, finalized. How big of an achievement is this for Colombia? Will it end decades of violence for real? Simon.
Look, it's a substantial achievement. I think there are obviously still questions about whether it's actually going to take root and be enforced in full. You've seen a series of killings just over the last few weeks of predominantly left-wing activists who claim that the government is not doing enough to protect them. But look, where we are now, who would ever have imagined that Santos would actually be able to make that speech, because the referendum that was held in Colombia appeared to doom the prospects of the entire thing, and yet they were still able to give it new life. So it's definitely a hopeful way to end 2016 for Colombia.
Quickly.
I think it's very important for Latin American countries like Colombia, who has a lot of potential to stabilize, to have its domestic economy fixed so that it can go on the right track. This will stop a number of issues from popping up, such as illegal immigration, drugs coming to the United States.
So looking ahead to 2017, what are the stories what will be the big stories of 2017? Afshin, let me turn to you.
Well, it probably won't be a big story of 2017, but I think it should be. I think we're living in a world where 85% of the world lives outside of Northern America and Europe. On the day that Donald Trump will be inaugurated president, there will be about 230,000 children born, right? And they will be born in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So the demographic weight of the world is in these big emerging markets. There's rapid urbanization, there's technological connectivity, new companies, new entrepreneurs emerging. This should be the 2017 story of the year, but it won't be, because the stories will be dominated by the headlines of the day.
Wang Guan?
I think I'm very worried and concerned about the potential U.S.-China rivalry, given the personalities of Xi Jinping, our president, and also the statements given by Donald Trump.
I think we should keep an eye on a country we haven't mentioned yet on
Iran.
the program. Actually, well, Iran, we should definitely keep an eye on, no question about that. But my country is another I country, which is India, home to more than 1 billion people. The Indian government, just before Christmas, demonetized the two most widely used banknotes in the country. 86% of the country's currency was taken off the streets. I was in India just before Christmas. The pollution in Delhi is absolutely unbelievable, worse than anything I've seen in Beijing or Mexico City or anywhere else that I've been traveling to lately. I think you've got to keep an eye on India and the government of Narendra Modi with a view to seeing exactly how he can continue walking the tightrope that he's currently walking, because it is a tightrope.
And will we still be talking about terrorism in 2017?
Yes.
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 All right. I hate to leave it on that note, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And that's all the time we have for Asiye Namdar in Washington, D.C. Thank you for being with us.